This is the Power Break Podcast number 219, titled The Power of Just One More. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. Got your One Breath from Death shirt on. That's a different one than the last time I saw one, which was
That's
like,
true.
This was like 5 episodes ago.
This is the oldie moldy. This is the one that was original. We did right after my One Breath from Death experience. We actually had kind of a team that we formed to do some races around, running races, and we all wore those. And it was fun. It was fun to get the word out that God had spared my life. Anyway, this is the Power Break Podcast, folks. JT is in North Carolina, and I'm in Clearwater, Florida. Both of us are thankful that as this goes out, released on the 11th of October, of course, we'll say, well, a couple of weeks ago, the storm went through. So we're all safe and sound. Our friends to the south of Clearwater and to the east of Clearwater and to the southeast of Clearwater and to the northeast of Clearwater got hit pretty hard. And so we're thankful that we survived. How about you, JT? I know it headed up to North Carolina. Did it hit you?
You know, we only got rain for about 12 hours, and it was very minimal because instead of going back to the west once it hit land, it started to turn north almost immediately. So it really didn't make it as far west as we were, so we just got some rain, and that was it. So, yeah, I think we both dodged a bullet, buddy. More so you, because, man, Fort Myers just looks like
praying for those folks, that's for sure, and just received some information on how to participate, and I want to help our church do that. And I think, in coming days, I'll mention it here on the podcast, too. Well, JT, let's thank everybody for listening to our podcast. I notice our numbers continue to be growing, which is important, and so we thank you for that. Thank you for listening to the podcast and for telling others, and for, of course, giving us a rating and or a review wherever you download the podcasts. Yeah,
for anybody who doesn't know how that whole thing works, is an algorithm. Everything's an algorithm as far as like how you find things. So the most popular stuff and the best rated stuff pops up first. So if you leave a 5-star review, what you do is you help other people find it quicker. So if you do get anything out of the podcast, and I hope you do, then certainly get over there. At the very least, give us a 5-star review. But if you want to add like some comments too, that'd be fantastic. We would really appreciate it.
And of course, if you want any question answered, or if you want us to know about it, just send a comment on the question to jt@bobbrubaker.com. How does that work, JT?
How does that work? You just send it to me and I read it. And then you and I discuss it. And then you and I come up with a way to incorporate it into the next Power Break podcast.
There you go. Well, JT, today we're talking about the power of just one more. What's that bring to your mind?
You know, the first thing that popped into my mind was whenever you go mountain biking, it's considered a curse to say, let's just do one more lap. Because, it's one of those where you always get hurt on the last lap. So everybody always says, yeah, we'll do 2 more. And then everybody just kind of knows that the next one is the last one. And it's really
Are you
goofy.
guys superstitious or something? I don't understand.
Something, with the amount of people that get hurt mountain biking, I think there's a lot of superstition involved in the sport. I do.
Yeah.
But I love where you're going with this whole thing, getting right into Proverbs and the power of just one more. We're talking about the number of days, really, and boasting about tomorrow and all the things that we should not do in regard to that. So, let's get right into it, man. The power of just one more. What comes to your mind?
Well, as I wrote, that we all like to add just one more repetition, write one more paragraph, or read one more page, because that's good for us to stretch a little bit, But when we think of just one more, there are many examples in the Bible, including the parable that Jesus spoke about a man who had a fig tree and planted his vineyard, and that he planted in his vineyard. And he came seeking fruit from it one day and found none. So he said to the vine dresser, "Look, for 3 years now I've been seeking fruit on this tree, and I find none. So cut it down. Why should it use up the ground?"
Not good. You don't want to be
Not
that
good.
vine. Yeah.
The vine dresser there says, "Well, sir, just let it alone this year. I'll dig around it, put on manure, and then if it should bear fruit next year, good. If not, well, we'll cut it down." So he convinced the owner of the vineyard to just give me one more chance with this. And many times we look at what God has done in our lives. You know, He is the God who gives us just one more. Okay, we seek after that. We'll look at some examples of that. But also, as we're looking at it, I mean, we think also of the fact that, as JT mentioned, our days are short, so we need to apply ourselves to wisdom.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and sometimes, you know, I'll for those of us who are technically retired, even though I do have a lot that I do as far as, you know, getting the kids to school, that's an hour and a half in the morning, that's an hour and a half in the afternoon picking them up, you know, and then, you know, I try to come back here and do the podcast, maybe do guitar stuff, do some recording or some writing or whatever. So I keep myself busy, but I will absolutely say that us retired folks, we need to make sure that we're honoring the days, because it's so easy not to, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's real easy to do that for anybody. And, you know, when you're retired and you feel like you don't have a schedule, it's real easy to not do anything.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's another story. That's something for another time, right?
That's another story.
Yeah.
Shenanigans.
This is the power of just one more.
Just one more. All right, so let's continue to talk more about that as we turn to your blog. Did I say bog or blog? I think I said bog on that one. Okay. As we turn to your blog, which is located at bobbrubaker.com. There you will find a ton of resources, up to and including books and different corners like JT's Corner and Bob's blog and all kinds of cool things. At the very least, I recommend that you sign up for the blog, and that will show up every Monday in your mailbox, get you started for the week, and we try to sync those with the power breaks that we do that week. So just trying to keep you guys energized throughout the day. But let's talk more about the power of just one more.
As I wrote in the article, that anything you do, if you can stretch and do just a little bit more, you can find a sense of power from the breakthrough to go even farther than you had before. The athlete does all the repetitions the coach has prescribed, but despite feeling spent, he'll go after one more, finding new personal best. And then the writer, who has been spending hours on a manuscript, makes the decision to go just a little bit longer and finds the angle for which he or she has been looking. The point is, going the distance or doing the prescribed work is one thing, but adding just a little bit more can make a big difference. Well, we find the just one more principle in the Bible as Gideon sought confirmation from God, as God had told, also what God had told Moses, that Pharaoh would receive one more plague, and in the parable that Jesus told about the farmer giving the tree just one more year to produce. Well, let's look at Gideon for a second. Now, Gideon, of course, was called of God to deliver the children of Israel from the Midianites. It was really a struggle. The Midianites were really bringing a lot of oppression on the Israelites. And so Gideon, convinced by God that he was going to fight and that he was going to win the battle against the Midianites, he asked for God a little confirmation. He asked God for an indication or a sign that God would be with him. Specifically, he placed a fleece of wool out on the ground overnight, and in the morning he said if the fleece would be wet but the ground dry, he would believe God. Well, it was so. And then Gideon said, just one more time, let me try that again. And this time he said, let the fleece be dry, and then on the ground let there be dew. God had mercy on Gideon. His faith needed a little bit more I guess, another piece of evidence to convince him that God graciously blessed him and what power there was, and just one more to get in. He and his 300 men went and defeated the Midianites. He's even mentioned in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, which is kind of the hall of faith, if you say, he was there.
The hall of faith, I love it.
Yeah. Too many times, of course, we get bogged down by wanting one more, and then another, and then another, and then another, kind of going into the steps of Gideon. But another one more is the way that God moved upon Pharaoh with the plagues that demonstrated God's power. As Pharaoh's heart was hardened, he resisted the demonstration of God's power time after time. So God let Moses know that there would be just one more plague to come, the plague of the death of the firstborn. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, the parable that Jesus told depicting the gracious way that God treats his people. God, of course, is a master gardener, and he's looking for fruit from all of us, and so many times he looks and finds none. And aren't you thankful that our Lord Jesus Christ would be depicted as the vine dresser here in this parable, steps up for us to get us another opportunity?
Right.
The point is, we find blessing in just one more. One more, if we take what we have to do and we do a little bit extra, that, of course, produces a blessing in our lives, but also when we consider God, that God is gracious to forgive us and give us one more opportunity. He's also gracious to give us one more sign or indication that this we go. He gives us that nudge, and sometimes we don't take it right away. So God is gracious to us, and may we take that in turn to use what God has done for us and use it to his glory. And after we've done what we've supposed to do a little bit more and find power in doing so.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, today was actually a great example of just one more for me. Last night tonight, let me go back a little bit. Tonight we have
we record this,
our first Wednesday. Yeah, as we record it. Our first Wednesday is basically that's when we do our baptisms at our church. That's when the music is really more focused on being a central part of the worship. So there's more songs and stuff like that. Well, last night we had practice, and I was able to determine quickly I should just do one more day of actually making sure I got these songs down, because we changed some keys and I wasn't really where I wanted to be. So, I added just one more day of getting some practice in. And, what it's about is honoring what God gives.
Yeah. That's called not perfectionism, but excellence, giving God excellence, right? And that's doing your very best.
Yeah, and if I end up, making a mistake, that's all good. But I know I didn't shortchange God in the preparation.
There you go.
Yeah.
I appreciate that about you, JT, because you're always doing that, and that's good, because that's a good lesson to teach your boys as well. And the whole concept that we're talking about, folks, there is power when you take what you need to do and just add a little bit more, because God does that with us time after time after time. So check out the article. It's found at bobbrubaker.com. It's called The Power of Just One More.
So what's happening, Bob? Is there anything you want the listeners to know about this week?
Thought it'd be good to talk about the power of gratitude, and there's always room for more gratitude. You ever stop and think about that? You're grateful for things in life, and as we record this, this is the week after the big storm hit our area, or was headed toward our area, and then missed us. And so we took a lot of time on Sunday this past week and just gave thanks to God. And I noticed that we always have a communication card where people can fill out prayer requests, and we bring them before God and as a church body. And just more and more people had just praise and thanksgiving to God for seeing us through the storm. Well, there is power in gratitude, and that's what we're talking about, the power of gratitude. It's a book that I wrote that just encourages you to look at every day and the gratitude that is available just as you dig down deep in your soul and find reasons to thank God. Well, anyway, check out the book. It's called The Power of Gratitude, and while you're at bobbrubaker.com, check out the sermon links of the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, Florida. At present time, we're going through the book of 1 Peter. I took a little time during the summer for the summer series in Psalms, but we're wrapping up 1 Peter this fall before we get into the Christmas season, so we're in the midst of it now, chapter 4. Check out those sermons at bobbrubaker.com, along with the books and other things at bobbrubaker.com.
This is the Power Break Podcast. I'm JT along with Bob Brubaker, and this is time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or for Bob, feel free to email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering those questions on an upcoming Power Break Podcast. And after I say that, and we move into question number one, the very first question that we have is actually from a listener. How you like them apples, Bob?
There you go.
Yeah, pretty cool. So from a listener, the person was actually reading the Power Break article that was sent out because they had signed up for the blog to show up in their email. And they wanted to talk a little bit and ask a question about when we talked about morning prayer. So this is what she writes, Bob. I do have a couple of questions about the most current posting, morning prayer. Yes, there are folks in the Bible who rose early and had quiet time with God, but my question is, why does it need to be early morning? So many believers advocate in this, but she goes on to talk about how her entire life she was an early riser. She actually was a college swimmer. Sounds like a very accomplished athlete. But now she's probably more like me. I wake up probably a little bit later. And then she goes on to ask, what's wrong with praying later, or maybe at noon, or maybe, 5 o'clock in the evening. Is there anything wrong with that? Does he delight in our prayers and time with him anytime?
Well, as we talked about when we did the podcast on that subject a number of weeks ago, actually, but this time, we mentioned that, yes, it really does pay to get up early because there are fewer distractions. And yes, it really does pay to get up early because it is a demonstration of your faith because you're actually denying yourself. But it doesn't mean that if you don't get up early that you're actually doing something wrong in the sight of God.
Right,
It doesn't mean that he doesn't hear your prayers. It's just the very fact that, some people, as we mentioned during that time, we talked about people in shift work. Like at one time you were the undercover policeman around here.
I was the undercover brother.
The undercover man. Anyway, and you worked at night, overnight, and many times into the wee morning. And so, obviously, that if JT went to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, didn't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning for a devotional time.
Yep.
But what we did say was there's just value in discipline. So
that's the big point. Yep.
Yeah. If your day starts later, okay, maybe your early morning is later than my early morning, but it doesn't mean that it's anything less. And the point is disciplining ourselves. Yeah, Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. That's discipline.
Yep.
And take up his cross daily and follow me. So, yes, does God delight if our prayers are at noon? Well, of course, Daniel prayed morning, noon, and night, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's never a wrong time to pray. And what I was making a point in the article was there is a benefit when we do discipline ourselves, deny ourselves, and get up early. But I never want to come across, and if I came across, I apologize for that it was something less in the sight of God. I just think that when you get up early, when you discipline yourself to get up before anybody else, this is uninterrupted time.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's really hard to find that at any other time of the day.
That's right.
But again, if your uninterrupted time is later in the day and you can afford to do that, fine. I'm not saying that doesn't count, but let's consider the fact that there is value in self-discipline and denying ourselves. What say you, JT?
Well, no, you hit the nail on the head right there at the end. And really, for me, my schedule in the morning is I get up right before I have to take the kids to school. So I don't get up early because what I know is going to happen is I will, number one, I do a devotional in the car with them. So I pray with the boys. And then we talk about the devotional. Then I drop them off. And then I can either come home or go to a coffee shop, and then I can actually dive into the Word, and I can do some devotional stuff. But I know that that is the time in my schedule where I'm not interrupted. So really, I think you nailed it. Where in your schedule during the day are you not going to be interrupted? And that's when you should spend time with God. But you got to discipline yourself to do it and not do something else. In the morning, a lot of times, like Amy's like, if I do it in the morning first thing, I know I'll do it.
There you go.
I won't get distracted by anything else. I won't end up, chasing a squirrel in some direction or an emergency that happened overnight that I got to deal with. I get up early, I get it done, and then I start my day afterwards. And she does that because of the potential for being distracted. And that's where the discipline part kind of can go sideways. So that's my 2 cents, my friend.
Well, I just want to say thank you to the listeners for their questions and their comments. It does help us to keep in touch with our listeners and get the feedback. I really appreciate it because, I always like to deal more with that subject, and so we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so question number 2, kind of back on the topic that we were talking about earlier in the podcast. From the mental aspect, how do we apply this power of just one more from a mental aspect? And really, this is where the rubber's going to meet the road.
I think that going back to we've talked about the Rebecca principle before, but just to remind everybody, in the book of Genesis, when Abraham sent his servant to go and search for a bride for Isaac, that he went into the area where Abraham had come from, where Abraham's brother had lived, and so what he was looking for is a bride. And so he said, he prayed that God would show him the woman, and said, kind of an unusual request, and said, when I ask this woman for water, because he stopped at a watering place, and if I ask her for some water, that she'll give me a drink of water, and then would ask or to offer to water the camels also. And that was a pretty big ask, because that's a big job to water all the camels.
Right.
Well, I think they drink gallons of water. Anyway, and he had quite a few of them. So as he's praying that, no sooner prayed that, he saw Rebecca coming to him to gather water for her flock. And so he said, could I have some water? And she said, yes. She gave him some water. She said, I'll water your camels also. And so
that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Eleazar starts praying to God. So what I'm getting at, we call the Rebecca principle, and that is to do what is expected and then some. Okay, you could apply that to athletics, to your work ethic, to your home life, to your time with God, etc. Do what is necessary, and then add a little bit more. That's the Rebecca principle. Here's what the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. It says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So do not run aimlessly, and do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. The Apostle Paul was an advocate of doing excellent work, and that is excellence, doing the best you can and doing what you're supposed to do, and then a little bit more.
Yeah, this is something that I constantly find myself talking to the boys about. And I will tell you quite plainly, throughout my career, especially when I was in a position of boss or picking people to be in a unit that I was running or whatever, really, it was the extra that made you stand out. Mm-hmm. And it was the extra that made me know that you're not going to end up being the minimal guy that comes into the unit, puts the least amount into it that's necessary, just kind of minimal effort. And that's not how you actually, number one, you don't want to surround yourself with people like that. And number two, that's not how you excel. And that's certainly not how you honor God, let alone your boss or, for me, it was the city of Largo that I had to my job as a police officer was to do everything I could to serve that community. And if I was just showing up and I was just mailing it in, I wasn't serving that community.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So, it's that little bit extra that actually makes you stand out, but it also that's the thing that honors God.
That's right.
So I would certainly encourage people to do that.
Good point, JT. And that's how you look at it mentally, just doing what is necessary and then a little bit more.
And a little bit more. Yep. All right. So question number 3 from the physical aspect of life. So let's talk about exercise helping your brain function. I think we all kind of know that that's true.
It really does. It really is. But it's interesting to notice some studies that have come out that there's a real correlation between exercise and short-term bursts in creativity. Yeah. Researchers noted that walking boosted creativity, whether it occurred indoors or outdoors. Seems like this bodes well for people who like to take walking meetings. Do you ever have a walking meeting? I've never done that, but I've heard of people doing that.
Nope.
Yeah.
I like it, though.
My friend said his boss said, let's go for a walk and talk about this. And so anyway, there's some people that are doing that are incorporating physical activity into their lives, not only find it beneficial for their hearts, but also their brains as well. And building on this, a prior research, new study from Austria tried to determine the link between regular physical activity and one's creative performance. And rather than just short-term effects, they felt immediately following exercise. Scientists gave 79 participants activity trackers and monitored their movements over 5 days. This method helped to measure all activity, including walking, vigorous exercise, and spontaneous movements that occurred over the week. Well, after 5 days, the researchers measured each participant's creativity with tests ranging from verbal associations to drawing exercise. The most active people proved to be the most creative, showing a correlation between overall physical activity and creative cognition. What do you think of that, JT?
Well, I think I think now it's really not a secret. For some reason, it doesn't really happen as much. At least it didn't in Florida. But a lot of the northern companies that, like my brother-in-law Scott, his company, they would, right in the middle of the day, be like, "All right, come on, we're going to have a ping pong tournament," and it would get people up, it would get people going, it would get people physically moving.
Yeah,
and they found that their productivity and especially their creativity, when it came to the job, it skyrocketed. So, there's a lot to how badly sitting at that desk and just staying focused for 8 hours as opposed to going out for a walk or exercising during lunch or exercising before you get to work. Those things really get the juices flowing, and it's really good for your brain.
That's right.
Yeah. So, I would encourage everybody that you incorporate that into your day. Some kind of movement, exercise, doesn't have to be a lot, but I promise you'll be more productive because what is it that scientist said? That objects in motion are more likely to stay in motion?
Hey, there you go, quoting this big.
That's right. And I can't remember who it was, but it was.
I think it was Albert
Newton.
Einstein.
No, it was Newton. Yeah.
Okay, so folks, it does take discipline, but your heart, your muscles, your bones will enjoy exercise, and your brain appreciates heightened creativity. So there you go. You can't lose. It does take discipline, though, and as we point out each week, that discipline does make the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at bobbrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 219.
And submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com and listen for our answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Quick word for the power of gratitude. We've been talking about the power of just one more today. Well, there's power in gratitude, and if you start the list of gratitude, just add a little bit more, just one more, and then one more. It'll do you well. The Power of Gratitude, the book that we're offering this week, you'll find it at bobbrubaker.com.
Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast, and check out news, show notes, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at the Power Break Podcast. We'll see you next time.